We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Lindsay Patterson, Mike Santagata here. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Basketball, there's a crazy trade. I feel like everybody's trying to figure out like what would be the equivalent of Luka Doncic for role players and Anthony Davis and sending a role player back and getting a first round pick. And it's so hard because I think there are NFL equivalents to Luka Doncic. You want to look at like Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, young, very good, but not the best, like top 2-3 quarterbacks compared to top 2-3 NBA player who's like 25 years old. It's hard to find like a 31-year-old injured a little bit, but still a really, really good player. It's almost like, yeah, remember Matt Stafford, like right before the Super Bowl? Like, yeah, maybe that if you could trade current Joe Burrow for that Matt Stafford or current Josh Allen for that. So that's, I think, what I would land on. And all I have to say is, what a ridiculous trade. I think, and the other part of this is, it can only be the second worst trade I've seen in my life.
Yeah.
Because we're still seeing the ramifications from Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, that is absolutely wild. I agree with you. I feel like everybody that morning, and here's my mistake. I happened to wake up, I woke up super early on Sunday morning and I looked at Twitter and I thought, I'm seeing these comparisons, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and I'm like, what happened overnight? Who got, well, obviously you couldn't be traded in the NFL right now, but I was so confused. And then I start looking at my timeline and I'm like, oh my goodness, Luka. And I'm not even a huge NBA fan, but you still knew what Luka was to Mavs fans and the organization. So that was definitely surprising. I agree. I feel like every reporter was doing the NFL comparison and what it could mean and who it would be. And I agree with you. It's just a really hard comparison, but they were definitely all out there. And I feel for Mavs fans, I was sad for them, but I'm, like I said, not even a huge NBA follower. But man, that's crushing for an organization. And I agree with you, speaking of trades, we'll get to that in just a moment when it comes to Myles Garrett. And I was happy to see that news. But again, with trades, it never feels over until it's over. Because, for reference, the two players I want to talk about. And I know fans are probably tired of hearing, like, what's going to happen with T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson. But we're in the offseason for the Bengals. And these are going to be the conversations that we're going to continue to have. Trey Hendrickson, T. Higgins, they both requested trades last offseason. We know how that played out. Both played for the Bengals in 2025. Obviously, the Bengals are a little bit different of an organization from some in the NFL. And I think it really sounds like for Myles Garrett, he really wants out of there. But when it comes to Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins overall, Mike, how are you feeling about it right now? We're about 4 weeks out from the franchise tag news, the deadline, honestly.
Pretty much the same exact way I felt about it the past couple weeks, I think.
Yeah.
We don't know anything more. I mean, unless you start believing like random Twitter accounts with 7 followers. They're like, I've got breaking T. Higgins news, but I won't tell you what. It's like, okay.
No.
You want to just pretend that you have information? That's a bizarre thing to lie about, but all right. If it makes you feel good for like 24 hours where the people of Twitter sometimes fall for that and go like, what's going to happen? It's like, He doesn't know. That person doesn't know. What do you mean? So I have no different opinion. I'm like, I think they'll, if I had to guess, I think they're both on the team next year. Do I think they're both extended? That might be a bit of a stretch, but I think they'll both be on the team. I mean, the Bengals are stubborn. They've shown that. I don't think they're going to let T. Higgins walk this season because the double tag is like 26 mil, which is probably within the realm of what they're willing to pay him if they paid him, and probably less than he would want if he hit the open market or would get if he hit the open market. Hopefully they're going to use that tag time, if they do it, as an extension window or as a window to trade him and get him extended somewhere else. I think the double tag falls into like very anti-player to me, or it is like you already used your one resource to keep me here and force me to stay on this team and negotiate with you. The double tag turns it into like, when can I leave? when can somebody leave? The only person I remember playing on the double tag then leaving would be Kirk Cousins. He had to for Washington because they didn't pay him. I can't think of anybody else that got double tagged and then played on that tag versus getting traded before that tag would hit or getting extended.
Yeah, I think overall, I agree with you. Kind of feel like both are going to be on the team next year. But if you think about it, and I am, starting to think about the numbers, obviously, I feel like there's no issue. They're going to extend Jamar Chase. The only problem is we've talked about it on this podcast. I need that done before honestly, get it done before the offseason program for all I care. Just get it out of the way, get it done. Get it done if you can get it done before free agency, but I don't think that they'll have it done in 5 weeks when free agency begins. Obviously, it's a high number. It's huge. Everybody knows. I mean, you really don't have anybody you're going higher against. It's the Justin Jefferson contract from last year, and he went and had a triple crown season. So it's going to be a couple million above that. So we'll see. And a lot of people are kind of pointing at the 40 million to be determined on that. But my focus right now is T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson because those are my concerns. If you are the Bengals front office, which a lot of people forget when they're like, oh, they can't pay 2 wide receivers. They can't pay Trey Hendrickson too. The Bengals aren't really paying anybody that high number outside of Joe Burrow because they're not good at drafting. So they're not paying any of these draft picks. And, there's not anybody that's coming up right now this offseason. Next year, that's a whole nother question of what you're going to do. Even this offseason, do you pick up the Dax Hill fifth year option? Next year, you got to worry about your other draft picks and what that looks like for the future. But for now, if T. Higgins, what a lot of the NFL insiders, and look, that could be his agent side putting that stuff out there, but he would get 30 million plus in the open market. Do you believe that?
I think that's other teams putting that out there. Like, hey, don't re-sign with them. You'll get 30 plus million on the open market. Mm-hmm. And maybe those are other teams feeding his agent that info and then his agent leaking it. But either way, I think they know the Bengals won't pay that. I don't think think the Bengals will pay that much. I think if he stays in Cincinnati, he'll probably be under 30 million a year. And I know the guaranteed money, it's not going to be like a fully guaranteed contract in Cincinnati. But if he wants to stay, I think he also knows those concessions, and he's just going to push for as much as he can get out of them. That's reasonable for him to stay. But yeah, I think those are other teams saying that. I mean, you look at what wide receivers much worse and older than him get on the open market. Look at Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Look what he got in the open market after the Jags season. This isn't Calvin Ridley. We don't really know. He was awesome in Atlanta. This was after he went to the Jags, and most people's feelings about him after that were like, he's fine. Then he goes and breaks the bank. There's nothing like the open market when you're the best player on it. And that's also what we'll get to eventually with Trey Smith, and why I don't think they'll be in on that is when you are the big fish, you control the market, you get whatever you want, essentially. You are not getting a discount to get those players. That's also why I also think in my head, you let T. Higgins go, and there's this great thought about we'll use that money in free agency. Well, you're not getting discounts for the most part in free agency. When you do, they look like Nick Scott. They look like what? And Geno Stone turned it on at the end of the season, but they look like Geno Stone. They look like Sheldon Rankins. Sheldon Rankins wasn't even a discount, to be honest. He just didn't play up to the standard that he played before that. But they look like the guy, Lyle Collins. That was a discount free agent. Comes a point where if a guy's signing for a discount, sometimes you got to look around and go, why? Now, you also get the Mekhi Bectons that sign and then go have their best season that they've ever had. There's other guys like that
Tart.
Tier Tart. Well,
I mean,
we knew there was an issue there, so we knew what the problem was in the first place. But with Becton, it was kind of like, I don't know if he's any good. So this is just a low risk signing. He had to go compete with Tyler Steen to win that guard job. With Tier Tart, it was like, yeah, he's pretty good, but I think he might be crazy. I think what
they might need a couple crazy people on their defensive side right now.
Yeah, not opposed. But what I'm just saying is, you know what T. Higgins is. You know what he is in this system. You know how he works in this system. You know how good he can be here. And you're probably going to sign him for less than he would get in the open market if you make a couple concessions towards him. That's where I am on just pay T. Higgins, because I am a big believer in drafting a guy, developing that guy, and then paying that guy. Not drafting that guy, developing that guy, and letting him go somewhere else for his prime. That's what the Bengals have done with a lot of these guys. You watch Jesse Bates, what he's doing. Go back a little bit. Jonathan Joseph had some of his best years in Houston, beating the Bengals too. Not just his best years in Houston, but he's on those teams that beat the Bengals. And then you move down even further in the past, you look at Justin Smith, and then he goes and he's like an all-pro in San Francisco. So why are you taking these players who might not be an all-pro right now, and they might not be an elite player, but they're like right below that, what I've called the red chip. They are a red chip. You've got the blue chips, your Jamar Chase, your Joe Burrows, and they pay those guys. But the red chips, stop letting it. Kevin Zeitler, another guy, he leaves and he's awesome the rest of his career, twice in the AFC North. You let these guys go, and then they go and they're great. You know they're good.
Yeah.
Versus using that money and trying to sign people. And I don't know, I hate to say it, but like free agency is a little bit of a crapshoot. It's a little bit of, yeah, we think this guy's going to work in our system. We think this is going to work, but the Bengals are very much, they always want to win the deal. And when you always want to win the deal, you're going to have to move down the free agent list because you're not going to win the deal with the top guys. So then you're really gambling on these middle tier free agents, and they have struck out the past 2 years on that. They cannot seem to figure out how to get the magic of their 2021-2020 free agency class that took them to the Super Bowl again.
Yeah, there's a couple things. And I do want to hit on a little bit what Duke said, because we recorded last week after Duke Tobin talked to Cincinnati Enquirer Kelsey Conway. And he was honest, and there was a lot about that. But I want to focus on T. Higgins, because I feel like that's the number one thing. If the Bengals, which they can do this, they can extend Jamar Chase, they can extend Trey Hendrickson, and they can extend T. Higgins. I don't know if they will do I don't know if they'll do all three. I just don't. I feel safe to say, obviously, Jamar, but when it comes to T, I truly do feel like it's the T or Trey, and then they might trade one. And when I think about trade, I think Trey Hendrickson, to be honest with you. And I don't want them to. I want people to know that is me saying I do not want that to happen. I'm trying to think how this front office will operate. I don't know how. They need to change their ways in a lot of areas, including guaranteed money. But for me, I want them to do all three. I don't know if they'll do all three. And Jamar, like I said, slam dunk, that'll get done. And I shouldn't say that, but I feel really good about it. Not because I'm some insider. I'm not. Just because I feel like we both can agree Jamar Chase needs to get done this offseason.
Blue chip player. They pay those guys. We've looked in the past.
Yeah. So here's my thing with T. Higgins. There are three things. You mention it. Guys that you already have here, the Jesse Bates, the Kevin Zeitlers. For me, your homegrown talent in the NFL, people you drafted. People can say all they want about, T. Higgins. He was there. He's first round talent, but you know what? He was the first pick in the second round, and the Bengals got him. They probably turned that card in as fast as possible to see T. Higgins sitting there in the second round with the 33rd pick. Mm-hmm. That was super easy for them. Number two, Joe Burrow is speaking and saying several times, it's not once, it's not twice. I know he did it with Jesse Bates. It just feels different every chance.
It feels like he's pushing harder. Yeah, the Bates thing was more once or twice, I think, that entire offseason, where this one feels like every chance every time he has a microphone, he's saying it.
Yeah, and there has been several times for Joe Burrow, and I just that shocking out after the Dallas game, I felt like he was just like, all right, I'll tell you how I feel. And obviously he has those conversations with the front office. Duke Tobin even says that when the offseason begins. But I think you put the pressure on a front office when you start to just put it out there. You put it out there in the media, and Joe Burrow has done that. Jamar Chase has done that. He did it again at the Pro Bowl. Number three for me, Mike, if we talk about some of the holes this team has, if T. Higgins walks, guess what's a need?
Wide receiver.
Exactly.
Don't be surprised they're drafting a wide receiver at 17 if T. Higgins walks.
No.
Yeah.
That would be a failure. That would be a failure by the front office when you think of other needs. Interior, defensive line, offensive line. You could think of all the defensive positions that they would need to go and use that on a wide receiver when you have the wide receiver. And here's the thing. Extend T. Higgins, and I know it's going to be a large number. It's probably not going to be 30 a year, but it's going to be a pretty higher number, which what they could have done 2 years ago to save themselves, but they didn't do that. Same thing for Jamar Chase last year. Could have gotten that done. All the stuff that they could have done. Fix it now. That deal with T. Higgins is going to look good in a year. It's going to look good 2 years from now, just because that wide receiver market's going to keep going up. The next wide receiver next year, probably going to get more than Jamar Chase got this year. So stop making things harder on yourselves. I feel like they just do things that are hard versus smarter. And it's so frustrating to watch because we've given them credit plenty of times. I would say the 2020 offseason, obviously the offensive line was not good enough, but they spent money in free agency. And I know they were on a rookie quarterback deal. 2021, they hit on those free agency picks, but they haven't had two good free agency classes since, besides Orlando Brown Jr. Obviously, that was huge for them, but you let Jesse Bates go.
You look at everybody else besides Orlando Brown Jr. in that class, and you go like, I don't know if I could call this a hit.
No. And I think in my mind, I was just still giving them credit from 2020 and 2021 that I was like, oh, they're still spending money. They're still having a really active offseason. But in reality is we were still giving them credit for things from 2 years ago. And that's not how things work. You have to get with the program if you are going to be NFL owners. You can't be in your old ways. You can't. You have to change. And I feel so frustrated talking about this topic because, Mike, I said to you in the middle of the season, I was like, or probably even before the season, I get why they're going to move on from T. Higgins. And then I changed my mind. I was like, you know what? They really need to keep this guy. I don't know what they're going to do. I know there are a lot of people that feel their percentage is higher. T. Higgins changed his agent for a reason. A guy who was going to guarantee him a crazy contract if he was hitting the free agency market. And he changed it to Jamar Chase's agent. I feel like he's doing everything he possibly can. And I do not think he should take any discount because he deserves this contract. And he's been professional along the whole entire way. The man showed up to training camp on time. And he's been so professional about it. He's somebody who Joe wants on the squad. And I think you have to listen to your franchise quarterback because in a couple years, your franchise quarterback starts to see you letting other guys go besides extending his wide receiver and Jamar Chase. What's he going to do for that second extension? That third extension?
Leave, request a trade, not stay. Like when you start making the quarterback mad and doing everything he doesn't want you to do, which they've already done, they've already let people go that he said he wanted to keep around. Now you look at, it seems like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, doesn't matter what you think as a random person at home, just thinking like, well, you can't pay two wide receivers that. And here's one thing. Look at what the Chiefs did. They traded Tyreek Hill and they still went to Super Bowls. Do you know what the Chiefs did after they traded Tyreek Hill? They traded for Kadarius Toney. They spent a second-round pick on Sky Moore, then spent a first-round pick on Xavier Worthy. Do you think they really don't care about the wide receiver spot? Or do you think they look at
DeAndre Hopkins?
Like, DeAndre Hopkins, they traded for him. But they're looking at that and going, we really need a wide receiver to replace Tyreek Hill. They've just been striking out. If you looked at Xavier Worthy, looks pretty good. Like I think that's the first time they're finally hitting. Yeah. But the Toney trade was a little cheap. I think it was like a fourth-round pick. It's still more than he produced. The Sky Moore thing never worked out. But it would basically be this narrative would make sense to me if they just hit Sky Moore and moved on, but they didn't. No. You can see how this doesn't work for the Bengals when you look at the Chiefs, which is the main thing that I think gets brought up by people that say you can't pay T. Higgins. Like, look at what the Chiefs did. They keep making Super Bowls. You look at what they did. Now they're spending resources left and right to fill that wide receiver void. And yes, they have an awesome head coach, offensive genius, and their best quarterback in the league. And then they talk about, well, they solidified the interior of their offensive line. Do you know how they did that? They signed the number one guy in free agency for one of the guard spots. Then they spent a third-round pick and a sixth-round pick to fill that. They did not go and find a mid-round free agent and then spend a first-round pick on that to fix it. They were spending I think they spent that first-round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so maybe they should have. But you look at how they did it, and it's not what people would say to do. When I feel like I listen to fans that don't want to keep T. Higgins or say, solidify the trenches. Like, okay, but the Chiefs didn't use first-round picks, and even second-round picks to do that. They used a late day 2 and a day 3 pick to solidify their trenches. Now, it looks like they're letting Trey Smith walk because they can't pay everybody, I guess. The other part of this, Philly has made the Super Bowl this year. They are a super team. They just paid Saquon Barkley after paying A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts, and Devonta Smith, and Jordan Mailata, and Lane Johnson. They pay everybody. I know. You look at Philly, and this is what I want the Bengals. It's not, and they're in the Super Bowl. How we Roseman is infallible. I think there's stuff he's done that gets praised and nobody talks about it after. DeAndre Swift and Albert Aguabanon, those didn't hit, but he takes chances and he pushes the chips all in. He tries to push everything in when he has the chance. And that is something that the Saints did with Breeze that they're still paying for at the end of that. But I would trade what I've done with the Bengals for a Super Bowl versus just being pretty good or striking out and watching Joe Burrow have to carry a casket of not great players as far as he can take them. I just want them to push everything in and be like, this is our Super Bowl window. I understand Joe Burrow's making a lot of money right now, but this is the Super Bowl window. When you have Jamar Chase in his prime, you have Joe Burrow in his prime, you've got T. Higgins in his prime, you still got Trey Hendrickson producing. Pay them all. Pay the guys that make a difference. Stop letting the difference makers walk and then paying guys that are like median level starters. Like that is getting so frustrating because those median level starters, if you think maybe they can go up, they haven't paid a median level starter and then that guy's turned it up and become an even better player. I feel like the closest you could probably get was BJ Hill recently. It was like he might have been slightly better than when they paid him. But look at Logan Wilson. I think he's pretty good, but I think he's the same as he was. And that is an above average starter. But you look at Jermaine Pratt, I thought he was like maybe an above average starter we got paid. Not there anymore. You bring in Von Bell. No, not a median level starter anymore. And you start looking at all these guys you keep paying instead of paying. Like, why would I pay T. Higgins $28 million when I could get both a guard and a defensive tackle for that? Because the guard and the defensive tackle might come in and produce like below average starters when you know what you got. You know what you have in T. Higgins. You've drafted, you developed him. He wants to be here. Just finish that. And finish it with Trey, too. He's still producing. Just push the chips in. I get so frustrated watching this team kind of twiddle their fingers and oh my God, the Bengals have the healthiest cap, the healthiest cap in the league. And it's like, but they shouldn't. Like that's something that like a team with a rookie quarterback that's kind of rebuilding should have before they push everything in. Like I don't think the Bengals should have the worst cap health in the league, but I think the healthiest cap. I look at that and I go like, well, they just didn't push they just haven't made an all-in move. And I don't know if they'll win a Super Bowl until they do put everything in and try to push it all and just try to win this year, next year. And Belichick has said that before, that when the team wasn't, after they won, I think 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, they went and they lost to the Titans in the first round. And it's just like, well, it's hard when you sell out to win, which they did. You can't really compete 3 years the same way in 3 years. And that would be fine with me if you just pushed everything in. And then in 3 years, well, it would look like last year. It wouldn't be like floor fell out. It would look like last year where the defense might stink and the offensive line isn't good. Anyway, I'm just saying, I am tired of cap health and like, oh, this team is, they could do whatever they want with cap, but they never do. Like, what's the point of having cap health if you never use it?
The hardest thing for me to realize and admit right now, and again, this could all change, and I will praise them if they get it done, if they get Trey Hendrickson, if they get T. Higgins done. People have to realize the cuts that they're going to make to even get even more money to make this happen, and they don't even need to make it insane. I mean, pretty much ones we've talked about plenty of times. Sam Hubbard's probably going to be one of them, Alex Kappa, the whole list of guys, even Sheldon Rankins. But the hardest thing for me to admit and realize as of right now, and again, that could change tomorrow if they announce a T. Higgins extension and all of that, is they will not win a Super Bowl if they continue to operate this way. They just won't. They won't. It is so different.
They'd have to get real lucky. Like I won't say it's impossible when you have Joe Burrow.
Yeah, nothing against Joe.
Yeah, you have to get really lucky. And this is what happened to them, I think, before the 2021 season, is that they got really lucky in terms of that free agency class where Chidobe Awuzie goes from a pretty average level starter in Dallas to being a Pro Bowl level corner. And you get Jesse Bates taking the ascension to a Pro Bowl, all pro level talent. He kind of did that the year before, but guys ascended, guys came in and produced at a high level. DJ Reader, another guy, he came in here and I thought he was even better than he was in Houston. And it's hard to hit a free agency class. Mike Hilton, another guy, all part of that same free agency. It's hard to hit a free agency class that well. It's hard to see a free agency class just explode in that way, where and you get a BJ Hill trade for Billy Price, a guy that is a bust so far in his career and ended up that way, but he's nothing for you. So you just send him out and you get a guy who ends up being an at least average level starter. Larry Ogunjobi comes in, has a good year. Like all these guys came in and they were just like Trey Hendrickson part of that. It's like, that is such a hard free agency class to hit. I don't know if they'll ever do that again. That is like when you look at some of those draft classes from the Saints where they got like Ryan Ramczyk and they got Alvin Kamara and down the line they got Marcus Williams. And it's like, oh, you just got like 6 starters in this class, including 3 of them all pros. That's kind of like the amount of luck they got in that free agency class. And I'm calling it luck because I feel like they've tried to recreate that the last 2 years and it's not been good. I'm not going to say it's been terrible. Like you found starters, you found Orlando Brown, which was a layup if you could sign him. But, you find some of those guys and it works. But and then Alex Kappa and Ted Karras, especially Alex Kappa's first year, and Ted has been a solid starter his whole time here. Those were hits. And Mike Gesicki, Hayden Hurst, both hits. But there's also a lot of misses in there. And that just feels like what free agency is. Like you're going to have misses. I don't think anybody hits free agency every single year. So I just think I wouldn't rely on free agency being the reason, especially when you won't pay top of the market guys. I'm not going to rely on free agency taking this team to the next level. I think you pay your dudes, you figure it out, you bring in some, I like the Eagles model. You bring in some low risk, high reward signings like a Mekhi Becton. I don't know who that would be this year. I haven't looked too deep in the free agency class. And you just roll from there. Like you've got guys are good that are difference makers in the game. And you roll from there. Because as I said at least, I think wide receiver would be heavily in play at 17 if they don't do anything. Even if they let Higgins go and they sign, I don't know, some dude. Diami Brown. They go sign Diami Brown. I think wide receiver is still in play at 17. Like I don't think Diami Brown is somebody that you look at and go like, oh, well, that's your wide receiver too, for sure. No, most teams want to have multiple weapons on the field. They want to have the ability to force defenses' hands and work from there. So I don't know. I'm glad you came to my side so I can just say this without feeling like, well, you can't pay those wide receivers. Where I'm just like, why not?
And I've admitted that. Like I've admitted it a couple times this year, and I said, you know what, you're right. You can do that, and you need to do that. And then when you have your franchise quarterback saying it not once, not twice, but 300 billion times in the span of 2 months, I think that's telling. Don't piss off your franchise quarterback. Don't do it. Don't do it. Listen to him. And I know Joe is going to be realistic. The Bengals can't re-sign everyone. That's just not how things work. But stop letting your superstar, your talented players go. Stop it. Just you have to function like an NFL franchise, because one of the things the Cincinnati Bengals front office is really good at doing is acting like they're poor when they have money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not how NFL offices. If you are serious and you have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, that's not how someone should operate. And Mike, I'm a pretty optimistic person when I try to look at this team, but just a lot of this after this season, and obviously the injury to Joe Burrow last year, the season ended how it was going to without Joe. But this year, there's no excuse for them to be in that position. They should be like Chris Jones talking on media day. The Cincinnati Bengals are their toughest, opponent in the AFC. A guy who's sitting at, his 3rd straight Super Bowl is talking about a team that didn't even make the playoffs. He understands the talent they have when you think about their offense and Joe Burrow, and they didn't even get to the playoffs. It's very frustrating. And I want to be wrong. I want to look back at these podcasts that we're doing in January and February and say, they stepped up, and we will credit them. We will talk about it on this podcast and say they changed their ways. They changed the way they looked at contracts and they got it done. But right now they don't deserve that. So that's not, I feel like they get our heart rate really moving pretty hard, like pretty hardcore when we start talking about this T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson stuff. Again, I'm not putting Jamar in there because I do think that they're going to get that done. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I feel like that's an easy one. Let's move on to a little bit of connection. I mentioned those guys requested trades to begin the last offseason. Myles Garrett. I don't think this is super surprising just because Myles Garrett was giving those quotes towards the end of regular season that, if he didn't really see the vision that the Cleveland Browns were going to do, he's going to talk to the front office. He wasn't here for another rebuild. And I'm sure those conversations went with Andrew Berry and the owners of the Cleveland Browns, and it probably felt like, this looks like a rebuild, and I don't want to go through that again. Don't know who your quarterback's going to be. This quarterback class is not super strong. I know this is not a Cleveland Brown podcast, but for me personally, I would love to see Myles Garrett out of the AFC North, out of the AFC, and all the way over to the NFC side. I think this is telling. Even Spencer, our producer, and Mike, you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, the Deshaun Watson trade, the worst in sports history. And it really just, look, they could have had Baker still. Look what Baker was doing in Tampa.
Yeah, but also, like, the ramifications are like, whew, especially because you gave him that fully guaranteed deal. The fact that, you look at the fully guaranteed deal, like the first player to get a fully guaranteed deal is a guy with 27 open court cases over sexual misconduct, is like, how is that the guy that you're like, and he hasn't played in a full year? I feel so bad for players because now owners are always going to point to that. Well, maybe not always, but at least for like the next decade, they're going to point to that. We can't give you a fully guaranteed deal. Look what happened with Watson. We'll go 90%. It's like some players should just get the fully guaranteed. Like, I think Joe Burrow should just get a fully guaranteed deal, but it's not going to happen. Not only just because of the Bengals, but I don't think any owner's paying fully guaranteed deals anytime soon because they can't get rid of Watson. There's no way out. He's so bad, but they can't get rid of him. Except, I think I saw that the Achilles, if it's bad, there's a way out there. I feel so bad for Browns fans.
I do.
In terms of, I mean, you're hoping he only set you back 5 years. You're hoping that trade only set you back 5 years because you've lost all your picks. It's crazy. You can't, the cap space, because they keep pushing that money further down the road, they keep kicking the can, and people point to it like, oh, what a savvy move by ownership. It's kind of like, I'm looking at the Saints going, you're doing the Saints thing for a guy that did not give you Drew Brees level play. Like, you're going to have to pay it eventually. To me, I'd just pay it all at once. Yeah, just rip the Band-Aid. Like, Myles Garrett wants out. Joel Bitonio's talking about, I'd rather retire than go through a rebuild. Whatever. Yeah. Just cut Watson, take the entire cap hit this year, stink, and then you get the hard reset. That's what I would do, at least, I think. I don't know, but I don't want to ever be in that situation. So, what a trade. And yeah, Myles Garrett requesting that trade. A little bit surprising, just because I know he kept talking about that, but I feel like I almost thought that was like a negotiating tactic of like, get your crap together. But I also think he probably watched them and went like, I don't care what they say. They're not getting anything together right now. Get me out of here. And I 100% agree with him. 29 years old. He's been to the playoffs twice, which, there's players that never made the playoffs, but never really been a competing team. The closest they got was that one Baker Mayfield year where it almost aligned for them because Chad Henne had to come in and play the second half of that Chiefs game. Everything almost aligned for them. But other than that, it's been like make the playoffs. The other playoff game they got blown out by Houston because Joe Flacco turned into a pumpkin. I don't blame him at all. Trade him to a contender. I would love to see him somewhere in the NFC. I would root for him. I root for Baker Mayfield now. I see him on Tampa. I'm like, he's fun. He's fun.
And he's happy.
Yeah, I like him. He's fun. He's happy. Cool. Myles Garrett, I think the same thing. Like, I don't love watching him when he's in Cleveland, but if he goes to, I don't know, anywhere, Detroit, I'd be like, cool. Yeah, awesome. Like Myles Garrett in Detroit, that rocks. So, yeah. We'll see. Mavs trade pending. That could be worse, but at least they didn't give up a whole bunch. Like I feel like on one hand, you can't win in the NBA. You can't win a title in the NBA without having like one of those top players. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, we'll see what he does in LA. I don't know. That one's like, let's wait and see. It's also so funny that the Broncos get away with the Russ thing. Or like that trade stunk for Denver. They cut him after 2 years. They did. But because the same year Watson got traded there, it kind of just goes under the radar. Like, that's only like the 5th worst trade all time. This is the worst trade of all time.
Yeah, and the Broncos, they ate it. They were like, done. Yeah. It's fine. We will eat the money and we're moving on. And look what happened to them. They got Bo Nix. This is obviously not a good quarterback draft for them, but you could get a lot of decent players and have a terrible year, get your quarterback next year in the quarterback class. So it's one of those things where Jeremy Fowler, some of the NFL Network reporters, because I'm thinking, oh, they're going to work out a contract extension. He's going to get tons of money, be the highest paid player. Good for Myles. He deserves it. But they said it has nothing to do with the contract. Like, he is like, I'm done. I'm ready to move on. And I'm starting to think that that's really going to happen. I just hope it's to an NFC team. Just get him out of my nightmares, because the one that stands out for me, and obviously there's plenty against the Bengals, it's the one where Joe was coming off the calf injury in the rainstorm, and Myles was like dribbling, and it was just like a nightmare. Like, he was coming at him, and I was absolutely terrified, and I never want to see that image again. So if Myles Garrett can be out of the AFC North, it would be a fantastic day. And I think, honestly, to just continue this, TJ Watt should do the same thing and request a trade. And just, make it those two out of my division would make me really happy. But we'll see what it looks like. But yeah, good for Myles. I hope it works out for him, and he's on another team. I will definitely root for him in the NFC. Moving on, another player on the same day, obviously not the same level, but he had a good career. He had a Triple Crown the Super Bowl year. He played the Cincinnati Bengals. I'll never forget the catch in the Super Bowl, unfortunately. Cooper Kupp was one of the top receivers for a little while, and then Puka, honestly, he stepped up and felt like their wide receiver won the majority of the year. Cooper was dealing with some injuries, finally got back on the field. Didn't realize this, from week 2 to week 18, he only had 600 yards. So nothing too crazy, but obviously when you have Puka out there and they can run the ball, the production's going to look a little bit different. 31 years old. The Rams have said that they are going to take, well, this is according to reporters, probably take a big chunk of that contract, but they told him, we're going to trade you when, the new league year starts. Where do you think Cooper's going to go? And I'm just going to say this, Dan Orlovsky put the Bengals in conversation to get Cooper. I don't see it. I know how the Bengals feel about plus 30, and just sign T. Higgins. Just extend him. Don't get into the Cooper Kupp. I don't know. Yeah. I don't feel it.
Need to stop talking about T. Higgins, but I did want to bring up, I think it's funny. Cooper Kupp obviously had the Triple Crown year, and a credible wide receiver. He won Offensive Player of the Year that season. He won Super Bowl MVP. Yes, so. He won Super Bowl MVP. Yeah. I just looked it up. He has as many 1,000-yard seasons as T. Higgins,
and he's younger. T.
Yeah, he's 30. He's going to be 32 this season. The cap hit is $30 million. Now I assume that changes with a trade.
Yeah.
Where I think that changes into I'm not the cap expert, but it looks like it would be like 10 to 15 million. Yep. I wish there was a button that let me know what the incoming team would take on out of that. But his cap hit the next season as well, 27 million. And maybe that'll also be lower on a trade, but I feel like the contract's kind of hard. The contract's kind of hard where it is a negative working with you here. Because, he was solid this season, but he's steadily kind of declined since that year. Not just in stats, where his stats have declined from 800 yards, 700, and he was injured during those. But you look at kind of the efficiency. I look at the yards per target, and he went from 10.2 elite stuff in 2021, where he won the Triple Crown, all the way down to 8.3 in 2022, 7.8, and now 7.1. And so that's just measuring how often, or what is the efficiency in throwing to this guy? How many yards do you get when you throw at him? T. Higgins, 8.4, 8.6, 9.4, 9.9. So, Cooper had to beat the 1 year, but since then, T. Higgins has been more efficient of a target to throw to. And then you talk about the injuries with Kupp too. I know Higgins has had some injuries, but I get more worried about a player in their 30s having injuries than I do about a player 25 getting injured. Because that, to me, is really what kills careers. I look back, what's really obvious is, with some quarterbacks, you think Ben Roethlisberger, injured elbow, never the same. Drew Brees, same thing. I think it was the elbow with him. Might have been something else, but arm injury, never the same. Peyton Manning, he had the foot injury, never the same after that. Mm-hmm. And Tom Brady never had one of those injuries, so he just kept going at the same rate. Yeah. So it's father time, but at the same time, it's father time. It's like that is the reason. But the reason is because you don't recover the same way from a devastating injury, and it's just such a violent game with violent movements as well as violent collisions that those injuries happen to most players except Tom Brady. So, one, Cooper Kupp, start eating a lot of kale, and two, I'm too worried about that. I'm too worried about paying so much money. I think it's crazy that you wouldn't pay T. Higgins. Like, what message does that send to your locker room and Joe Burrow that I would not pay the guy you want me to pay and that earned it here, but I would let him go to go bring in a guy that's injured and was good 3 years ago and pay him the same money T. Higgins would get? I think that would be insane. That's just I don't think that would go over well at all. I think that would, that would be pretty disaster. You could look at it as like, that's a business decision. It's a business at the end of the day. Yeah, but have some loyalty. Have like a modicum of loyalty. Not that you need to be loyal to every player or do this or do that, but the idea that you like, we can't pay 2 wide receivers unless it's that guy. We'll bring him in. We'll trade assets for him and bring him in and pay him. That's just hypocritical.
I just thought of, I don't think the Bengals are in the Cooper Kupp market. I'm going to be honest with you, but here's where it would make it. I see the nightmare in front of me. Nothing against Cooper Kupp, nothing at all against him. But the nightmare is, you know what the Cincinnati Bengals do when it comes to these guys? Who do they end up signing? Why do they end up signing some of these guys?
So cheaper.
Because they had a good game against them.
Oh, that's also true.
Oh no, like that would be my nightmare. Like, you know what? Had a really good game against us in the Super Bowl.
In the Super Bowl? Yeah. Well, and I don't know. It didn't work with Nick Scott. He had a pretty good Super Bowl game, and then they signed him. It didn't work. So maybe they'll finally change that. But 4 years ago, he had a pretty good game against us in the Super Bowl. It would be crazy logic to be like,
two triple crowns, two triple crowns on our team. We got, you know what? When you can do it, you got to make it happen. No, I don't want this to happen.
I do think a team that I think the Steelers would be
100%. 100%. Right? I agree.
That is their MO to me, where they're fine bringing in an older guy. They don't want to pay top of the market. I think the contract is going to let them get away with, getting him for like a 4th round pick or something. It just feels very Steelers to me to bring him in, end of his career. They need wide receiver help. They've been trying to trade for guys. They would be a team heavily interested in T. Higgins if he hit the market. They've got the cap, I think. I don't know who they're paying, but they're not paying a quarterback. So I would think they have the cap. I could see them doing it. I could see Cooper Kupp in the AFC North because the Steelers trade for him. There's other teams that might trade for him too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like a team that trades for him should be one that's competing, but that's the Steelers' MO, compete without a quarterback. That's what they've done like the past 5 years. Let's just keep trying our hardest to compete without a quarterback. They can't figure out the quarterback part of it, so then they end up getting bounced in the first round every year. But just feels very Steelers to me that they could trade for him. I don't know if they'll actually do it, but
yeah, I think honestly he's going to stay in LA and go to the Chargers, but we'll see. We'll see what it looks like. Let's move on to the Super Bowl predictions. It feels like it's been 3 weeks since the championship weekend, but we're almost here. Regular or playoffs are almost over, thank goodness. Chiefs and Eagles, Mike. What do you think is going to happen?
Very boring. How do you go against the Chiefs until you see it? Until I see one of these teams beat the Chiefs, the only people that have beaten them is Joe Burrow, Tom Brady, and they're pretty healthy. That Bucs game, they were not healthy. They clearly had a lot of issues in the offensive line that happened throughout that time. It's such a good defense. It's maybe one of the greatest defensive coordinators of all time because he's stuck in there and has kind of been the architect behind some of these Super Bowl wins. I know they almost lost to the 49ers, but to be honest, I don't remember. Once San Francisco, they didn't go for 2, I believe, at the end of that game to try and win it in regulation. Or was it at the end of score first in overtime? I don't 100% remember. I remember that they didn't try to win the game. They had a chance and they didn't try to win it. Once that happened, I kind of gave up. And I'll be honest, like the entire time I'm watching, I just kept thinking like the Chiefs are going to win.
Yeah.
And I thought that with the last Eagles game too, where I'm like, man, these Eagles are competing, but end of the day, I think the Chiefs just win. So I'm not changing that. I think the Chiefs win this game. I'd probably take them by a field goal. Kind of surprised it's so close. -1.5 for the Chiefs. Not that I would actually bet either way on that, but if I did, I'd probably take the Chiefs. Chiefs by a field goal. I think it's a close game. I think the Eagles are an incredible team. But at the end of the day, I'm not betting against Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, this defense, and Patrick Mahomes. I can't do it. I can't bet against them. And I feel like the Eagles, this is one of the best rosters outside of the quarterback we've seen. The quarterback's fine. He's not bad. He's a pretty good quarterback. He's just not, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen level. I'm going to take the Chiefs like 27-24. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to go low scoring. It's kind of crazy. I feel like that was their only game above 30 in the championship weekend, and they beat the Bills, and the Bills had every opportunity to win that game, which is absolutely wild to think about. I agree with you when it comes to my biggest thing is coaching and the Chiefs defense. I truly believe that they know how to win this game. They really do. You bring up a good point. They are extremely healthy. Obviously, having that huge bye week going in a divisional round helped them heal up pretty quickly. And here we are right now. It's not even Patrick Mahomes' play this season that I'm like, oh, yeah, they have the better quarterback. He is playing better. He had one of his better games against the Buffalo Bills. I like Spags, Andy Reid. When you have the coaching, I trust them more than I do the Eagles. Coaching staff, to be honest with you. Obviously, the Eagles have Saquon Barkley, and I look for him to be productive and have an incredible game on the Eagles side. But for me personally, I believe in the Chiefs defense. They're going to make it happen 3 years in a row. And I don't want it to happen. I would love to be wrong and want Philly to just win it. Then I don't have to hear about three-peat all off season. But at the end of the day, it's probably what we knew what was going to happen at the end of the season anyways. And the Chiefs will find a way to win 23-20. Pretty boring game. Yep. I truly think it's going to be close. I agree with the field goal. And they have a legit kicker. I feel like the Eagles kicker, Jake Elliott, former Bengal, friend of the show. He's been struggling.
Yeah.
So I think they'll miss an extra point on a touchdown, and
that's how they get to 20. They get 3 touchdowns, and Elliott shanks one. Good point. I think you're right about lower scoring. Now that I think about it a little more, because on the other side is another one of the great defensive coordinators, Vic Fangio. He's gonna have a plan. I feel like he's gonna have something ready for this. He's gonna have something cooked up for this Chiefs offense. And you're right, the Chiefs offense. I mean, they did turn up against the Bills. That's the one thing that pulled me back from saying like this. And I just don't know if they took the Texans seriously. Like, I feel like they didn't take them seriously like a real playoff thing. They knew the Bills game was going to be serious. They came out there and they showed that they can go score. But the Bills also lay down. Their defense lays down every time they play against the Chiefs in the playoffs. Not in the regular season, but in the playoffs, they lay down and die. And that's exactly what happened to them. So, yeah, I kind of like what you're saying. 23-20, I think it makes sense. I'm just with you. The Chiefs win. Unless you get a generational Saquon Barkley, like 150-yard, 2-touchdown performance, and I am rooting for that. I am rooting for the Eagles in this game. I do not care about the people that are like, oh, but what about Jalen Hurts? He's going to be ranked above Burrow.
I don't care.
Who gives a crap? Who cares? Yeah, I'm so beyond like these imaginary quarterback rankings. Who cares?
No.
I'm fully in on the Eagles winning this game. I just can't bet against the Chiefs.
I agree. Hopefully we're wrong, and hopefully it's a good game, but I hope the Eagles come out on top and Saquon Barkley is the MVP because, man, that guy is really easy to root for. Mike, what do you have up on Bengals Talk?
You get the second half of the Al Golden article, the back half, all about Cover 1, everything you could ever want to know about Cover 1. Well, maybe not everything if you're like a coach level. I don't go that far. But all the different variations, how it's played, and, you might just think man-to-man coverage, but there's also a lot about the leverage and how you play inside versus outside and to the help. And what do those guys that are in the zones do? And, the different ways to play it, how you get extra pressure with it, how Al Golden used all those players. So if you want to have, I said in the subreddit, I told them, if you read this piece and you read the front end piece, I am giving you an honorary bachelor's degree in Al Golden defense. So maybe I should come up with a quiz. Maybe I should have a quiz, just like a free quiz to take online to see if you get the honorary bachelor's degree in Goldenese. But that's what's up there right now. And then draft season, it's coming.
Draft season is coming. When we record next week, I hope we get some more Bengals news and a positive news so we can talk anything off season, because we are a month away from free agency and I cannot wait, I think. But check out Mike's work over on Bengals Talk. Follow him over on X, Bengals_Sands. You can follow me at Alan Patterson. Thank you for listening to our 50-minute podcast on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati.